I'm Chris Heilmann. I'm from England. Well, I'm from Germany, but I live in England because in London it doesn't matter where you're from, and people don't throw you out for being ginger or something like that. It's actually quite nice. And I've been an HTML5 advocate from the very beginning of it, and I've worked for several companies building like large JavaScript frameworks, applications, these kind of things. Basically, I started as a web developer when all the Java people were smiling at us begrudgingly and saying like, "Yeah, your toy language, we're never gonna make it, and HTML is just for people who don't know how VB script works." And it's good to feel smug about this for a while. And as this is an HTML5 meetup, I thought it's a good opportunity to take a bit of a look back of how much of a relationship I had with open web standards and how that worked out in the whole rolling out of these standards and what we're looking at right now. So I'm not going to go into details about technical implementations, but this is more a call to you to help me in my fight for the open web and in my fight for open standards. And that's why I built a Tinder-like interface to show my long-term relationship with the open web, which is on GitHub as well. So if you need that for whatever reason you might want to have an interface like that, that's basically 10 lines of JavaScript using just callbacks and animations, so you don't need anything like massive frameworks for these kind of things. And that's the beauty of browsers nowadays, because they all become better, much, much better than they were before. So I'm CodePoet on Twitter, so if you don't have enough pictures of hedgehogs and kittens and stuff in your life, that's always a good place to go. So that's a good thing, so let's go with that. And I love the web, and I loved it since the very beginning because I was a radio journalist and I was a newscaster, and I realized that getting known in your city is hard enough. Getting known like countrywide is really hard. Getting known worldwide means you have to commit a crime or spend a lot of money. And with the internet, you didn't have to do any of them. You could, but you didn't have to. So when you published something, people would translate it into Chinese for you out of a sudden, and you hope they translated it the right way and didn't put other things in there. But it was just incredible how, when I started with the internet for the first time, like, oh my god, I don't have to type in different telephone numbers to reach different servers. I could just type in a character sequence, and out of a sudden, I'm in a server from another country. I can buy products that are not available in my country and get them sent to me, and hopefully my postman will not lose them like they do always in England. But the physical space is what we're still fixing somehow. But the web itself, to me, was never a software platform, and I think it's kind of painful when people see it as that. And now that we are the cool kids and everybody looks up to us as being the only market where people are getting hired, everybody goes like, "Oh yeah, you gotta have a degree from this and that university to be a web developer." And I think the expert term for that is bullshit. Because in essence, everybody's invited to build things on the internet, and even if it was a little Tumblr page, even if it's a Facebook page, you're a publisher on the internet. You're invited to publish on the internet. So the arrogance of people saying we need more coders, we need more developers, we need more makers, we need more creative people and people that use the internet in the right fashion, rather than building something small and putting shitloads of ads on it and wondering why people don't look at it. But that's just me being a hippie about this. But I love the web, and I think it made my career. I never went to university. I didn't finish any job education. I would be probably homeless in Germany if I had stayed there. So now I'm actually lecturing at universities, and I love that. Like, I was in MIT, and I was texting my mom, like, "I'm in MIT. They're gonna find out that you haven't been to university." I'm like, "Yeah, mom, they know. They still invited me." "Yeah, but that's only for rich people. What are you doing there, you know?" For her, it was just mind-blowing that somebody would get this monkey on stage and tell them about things. It was about accessibility back then. So I love the web, and that hasn't changed. And I love the web most because of HTML5 and web standards. And we don't value those enough anymore because browsers are so wonderfully forgiving. You can type in whatever you want and something comes out of it. But when I started as a web developer, my main knowledge in the first 3 years was to know how different browsers mess up. So that was how I got contracts, because I knew how to make a layout work in Netscape 4 and in Internet Explorer 5. All of this knowledge is absolutely unnecessary and totally terrible that I still have it. But back then, that was the only thing, and that's why people like Zeltman and the WOT working groups and in the Web Standards org and these kind of communities that I worked in as well, we basically said, you know, Microsoft, no, we're not going to build stuff just for you. We want to write one code base for all the browsers out there, and that's why we have HTML standards, that's why we have JavaScript standards, and that's what you should support. And then Microsoft more or less listened after a long, long time, and the others started as well. And I think we undervalue that benefit that we have, because if you write an app for Android and an app for iOS, that's a completely different skill set. That's a different SDK, that's a different way of approaching it, whereas building it for all the browsers out there and all the form factors that the web is running on is one way of coding and one way of making. And I think it's incredible what we can do with developer tools and things like that in the browser already. So these are great standards. The only problem is, like, the party pooper on that whole thing was always Internet Explorer. It was like we had our great web standards party, and that was basically the turd in the punch bowl, because whatever we did, Internet Explorer just did not die because it was connected with the operating system. And when you didn't upgrade the operating system, you didn't get a new browser. And as much as we like to think that everybody will upgrades and gets new evergreen browsers and is super excited of rebuilding their computer every 3 days because there's a new version of Linux out, most of the people out there are not. They just click on an icon and then they basically go to the internet and look at Yahoo what the weather is like instead of looking out the window and look at the weather. But that's why we made the Microsoft Edge logo look like the Internet Explorer logo as well, because we did not want to confuse people. Before that, before we had Microsoft Edge and the Windows 10 upgrade, I always went to people's Windows machines and installed Firefox and changed the icon to the Internet Explorer icon, because all they did was click it and then like, oh, it looks different. Yeah, they changed it. Don't worry. It's like, it's like end users did not need to know. And sadly enough, we as developers always think like, ooh, we need to know everything about computers. So Internet Explorer was the party pooper and was a problem with it. Internet Explorer 11 was actually really good. It was a good browser that supported all the standards that people wanted to have. The only problem is the cool kids, including me, well, cool kids and me, basically we didn't even know anymore because we switched to Macs and Linux years ago. And it's quite funny that when in all these conferences that we're going to, and I spoke at 37 this year and I spoke at 42 last year, you only see people with Macs on stage while they're talking about like diversity in environments and open source. And it's quite interesting to see that. And that's why we didn't know what Microsoft was doing and how they were actually supporting the standards. Because one thing that Microsoft cannot do is piss off a lot of enterprise clients. Banks, insurance companies, governments. These are people that do like 10-year contracts, and you cannot tell them like, well, that's experimental technology. It just blew up in your face. Sorry about that. Your people don't need any pension plans any longer. That's fine. So they want to have standards. So when Microsoft got all with Internet Explorer 9, 10, 9 and 11, they basically said, we're standard compliant. And nobody cared. It was quite bizarre because we fought for standard compliance years and years. So it was an okay browser, but the problem is that it was strict standard compliance. So it came across as schoolmastery. They said like, oh, we're the ones who support the rounded corners, and people got very excited about 3D cubes with videos on each side at the same time. So Firefox and Safari and Chrome were already innovating and were doing amazing things, amazing shiny things, and pushed the web platform towards something that native platforms only could do before, while Microsoft was very excited and went out of a sudden that you have rounded corners and drop shadows, which was quite bizarre because drop shadows and rounded corners and gradients are really, really hard to do. And I worked on the Firefox engine, the CSS engine with people. These things are really hard to do. It took us like 5 years to make them work across browsers. And by then we had flat design. Everybody always complained like, oh, we don't have rounded corners. If only we had rounded corners, life would be so much better. And now we don't use them any longer. And you're like, really? Seems like every time the standard becomes a standard, people don't like it any longer. So the strict standard compliance was basically breaking the back of the Microsoft outreach. And I do work for Microsoft, but that's because they offered me a job. I'm hardly using their products myself, weirdly enough, and that's okay. But I think it's very, very important that we as a community understand that there's millions and millions of people out there that use Windows products. And you just go to a library, you go to a school, you go to any office, and you see these things in use. Just because we have these shiny, cool machines doesn't mean we're actually delivering for them. And as somebody who works on the web, my job is to make end users out there happy. My job is to make their lives easier. My job is to make them get an insurance quote or a bank account really quickly. And when you look at insurance companies and bank sites, they look like 1997 hasn't not changed. Because we as the cool kids don't even look at these products. We instead build like little startups like that all use Bootstrap and all look the same and like, oh, look how creative we are. So I was ranting about this for a long, long time in the web standards community that we're not fixing the problems of the web, but we're actually doing our own stuff instead. And now we actually have a chance to do that. So strict standard compliance was a good thing, but it was actually a bad thing because people just did not care. Whereas the innovation in browsers was a thing that people really wanted. Like, oh my God, you got animation already. The other ones doesn't have. The problem was, when browsers innovated, they innovated not according to a standard. They innovated only to their browser. So that's why we had prefixes. So we had like the dash WebKit dash, the dash moz dash, or we had like in JavaScript we had the moz or the WebKit prefixes in the method names, and this is all cool, but it's also very experimental. You cannot rely on this in production unless you actually tell the user they have to use one browser, and this is the worst thing you can do on the internet. Luckily enough, people don't like your product if you tell them to download a certain browser, and that is good because the web is built for everybody. Tim Berners-Lee, when he defined the web, he said it's independent of geography, ability, and environment. So if somebody has a Windows 95 machine that hasn't been upgraded for a long, long time, there's nothing you can do about this as a software developer. You can stomp your foot and you can call them Luddites, and you can say these are not people that I want to have, and then you realize out of a sudden that's a company that has 460,000 computers that are on this thing. Do you don't want to have people with that many employees looking at your product, or is it just for you to be cool? So I think it's very, very important that when we look at innovation in browsers, that in the last years, and especially with HTML5, a lot of browser innovation got into the standard. But a lot of browser innovation also became landfill of the web. Things that are incompatible with other browsers. And you go there and says like, you need Chrome to see this. It was at Le Web in France the other day, and there was a great overheard when somebody said like, if your website only works in Chrome, you didn't build a website, you built a prototype. And that's the same with every other browser. Like, you cannot force people to use one browser, especially in a world where in mobile devices, a lot of them are hardwired to the operating system. Older Samsung devices have a terrible old WebKit browser in them that doesn't get upgraded when Google comes out with a new version of Android. The whole of China and Russia doesn't want to go to the Play Store in California, so they don't get a new version of Chrome all the time as well. So the whole problem of Windows 95, the browser hardwired with the operating system, still happens on mobile devices. So innovation in browsers is a good thing, but also a bad thing, but I give it a good thing for now. And then, of course, we started building libraries. So instead of waiting for browsers to become better or browsers to start communicating with each other and making the different experimental implementations into a standardized application, implementation, we wrote a library to do that. That was always the thing about jQuery. If you use jQuery, you don't have to worry about browsers because it fixes every problem for you. And yeah, it does. There's a lot of like 80% of jQuery is like, well, 20% is giving you a better syntax, making it easier for you to write code, and a lot of it is just fixing problems in browsers for you. The problem is, of course, that these browsers never got fixed then because the problems didn't show up in products any longer. So there was no incentive for the browser maker to fix anything in their browser if people didn't complain about it because they just used libraries. The issue with that, of course, is when the library gets outdated and the library becomes the thing that is a problem. So a lot of like very bad ideas in technology like user agent sniffing and prefixes in browsers are now part of the operating system and part of the libraries that people use. And I worked, for example, with a company in England that has 140,000 pages on their site and maintained by 26 different departments that don't talk to each other, because why would they? That's other human beings, that's terrible. And I met the poor guy who had to basically refactor the whole website now. And he said, we only know how old parts of our web page are by seeing which version of jQuery that they used. So it's like rings in a tree trunk, is what he called it. It was just amazing. So that's a terrible thing. It was a good thing at the time, but a bad thing in the long run because we abstracted problems away rather than fixing the problems. So when I started at Microsoft, this was the pitch that I got because I came from Firefox. I worked on Firefox OS, and they told me we're going to bring out a new browser. It's called Microsoft Edge. I wanted to call it Microsoft Water Weasel, but they didn't want to do that. And it's going to be an evergreen browser. It's going to be the same across all form factors. It's going to be standards compliant, and it's going to be comparable with other browsers. And I'm like, cool. Because I hate Internet Explorer with a passion as a web developer, and I want this thing to die. So I said, like, okay, if I can be part of this, that makes that happen, and it's not just you telling me this in a job interview, but I really see what's going on. I want to be part of this, and this is pretty amazing. So this is what happened. However, we put the browser out on the web, the cool new standard compliant browser. We forked the Internet Explorer engine. We got rid of all the code that only was Internet Explorer, and we then put it on the web and said, like, the web's probably awesome on that, right? No. Because we still got the interface that was meant for Internet Explorer 6, because people checked for Safari. People did a user agent sniffing and said, like, if it's Safari, then give it the shiny thing. If it's any other browser, give it the I hate you from 1998 interface, and I hope you're going to click until you're unhappy and leave, because why would you spend money on us? So that's a big, big issue. User agent sniffing is the biggest problem. And that is not only Microsoft, that we had the same problem in Mozilla, we have the same problem in Chrome, we have the same problem in Safari, that people try to detect the browser. And here's the number one truth to take away. You have no idea what the browser is, and you will not be able to detect it with code. Because I can fake any browser. I've got this wonderful extension here, for example, on my Firefox, that's default user agent, and I can define any browser that I want to. And I do that because in Europe there's some cheap airlines that give you cheaper prices when you have an Internet Explorer than with a Safari browser. Because they expect you to have a Mac to have more money, I don't know. But it's just fun that you can do that. You can simulate an iPhone 3 and so on and so forth. And I think that's really, really important that we understand that you cannot test this. And people like Facebook and others have real issues with that as well. And it boils down to the impossible dream of making one interface that looks the same in every browser. You can do that by publishing a JPEG. And even that is not the same across browsers because it looks different from gamma to gamma from different screens. The idea of an interface that looks the same in every browser and form factor means you're actually using the internet completely wrong. The idea of a web product is that it is better when the environment is better, and it's still usable when the environment is terrible. So start from something that works and move it up. You can turn off JavaScript in Google. It is still a search box that works. If you turn it on, then basically it's the autocomplete and all the beautiful things that you have. And that's as simple as it is to build things on the web. Experimental features using prefixes were the big thing when the HTML5 thing came out and new browser wars started. Like, oh, we got animations already. We got gradients already. And all of those came with different prefixes, and people rely on them. So when you go on the web and you search around, you find like lots of white buttons with white text because the background is just a WebKit gradient. So if you don't have a WebKit browser, you don't get any background at all, and the only way to know what that button is like highlight the whole page or use the developer tools or something like that. And that's a terrible way of working. But we, for example, in Edge, we had to alias lots and lots of WebKit prefixes and also some Mozilla prefixes to not break the web and get the real experience. And that was painful because we wanted to get IE go away and the massively bloated, very terrible browser. We got lots and lots of code out. We were like, ooh, look at this lean thing. This is amazing. And then we put the standards in, and it was still lean and mean. And then all of a sudden, we had to put more and more interoperability fixes in it. And all the browsers are about, like, of the 15, 16 meg that most browsers are without fonts, 4 or 5 of them are just interoperability between browsers because people rely on that stuff. And it's just, if it says experimental, just think of like the Muppet Labs, you know, where things explode and Beaker dies every single time. This is what experimental is. So this was bad, and people still rely on it. Outdated libraries was the other issue. As I said, older jQueries, older Moo tools. Some of them actually have methods in there that ES6 now has natively. And we could not release the ES6 standard until we renamed them, because we couldn't break old websites. For example, array contains is now array index off, because array contains was used by Moo tools, and some government websites would not work anymore if our JavaScript engine and V8 and JavaScript core on Safari would have had that method. So the library helpers of the past became the landfill of the future, and that's a bad thing as well. And of course, you get broken implementations becoming de facto standards, which is always my favorite word. Like, it's a de facto standard. It's a slightly pregnant person. You know, it's like, no, this is either you have a standard or you don't have a standard. A standard needs ratification. A standard needs several people to implement it, to test it against it, and then have something with there. So what did we do if something was working in Chrome and Firefox in one way, but was defined in a standard the other way? So we could stand up on our high horse and say like, well, the standard is different, they're doing it wrong. And everybody would be saying like, no, Chrome doing something wrong, that's impossible. You know, so a lot of the de facto standards had to be built in the browser, and we had to violate the standard. It sounds theatrical, it's not really, standards don't feel anything. But it's just bizarre that a lot of things become de facto standards because they're easier. And easy is sometimes a thing that you should think about. Less code, it always cracks me up when people get super excited, like, oh, my library allows you to write less code. You're like, well, the web is already too full. The average website is 2.2 meg with 170 resources. So I'd rather write more code that's readable than write less code that's shorter. Because I came from Perl, which looks like minified Python. You know, it's very simple to write one line of Perl that's completely unreadable, that does everything on this planet. So writing less code, to me, also teaches you to be much more lazy in your approach to it. When you write a bit more, you think about it a bit more. It's like muscle memory. It's first time you learn driving a car, you basically go in there and you see all the levers and everything. And you're like, I will never remember this. But nowadays you can go into any car and you can just start driving that, but you don't think about that anymore because you repeated the thing so many times it became a second nature to you. Best thing in America is you want to have a car that cannot get stolen, just get a stick shift, because half the people wouldn't know what to do with that. So then we released the browser fully with all that stuff in there. So we had compatibility with the other browsers and the de facto standards that were out there. And now it's a browser that you can forget about. And that's kind of weird, but I love that. Because I want all browsers to be forgettable for us as developers. We should not have to install every single browser on our machines and test against all of them. That's a waste of our time. We should spend our time building interfaces, building solutions, building code that is beautiful and actually maintainable rather than knowing how browsers mess up. And a lot of the forgotten standards are now usable. That's the cool thing as well. When HTML5 came out, everything became we had our test drive in Microsoft, we had the demo studio in Mozilla, we have Chrome experiments, Safari had a few experiment websites like html5.com. All of these things are just basically shiny things like particle systems, every single cartoon character painted with CSS only and these kind of things. None of these things were really usable. They were just like, oh, look how a shiny thing that I can do, which is quite hilarious because everybody was like, oh, Flash was so useless. Flash only had this shiny stuff. Look, I can do it in HTML5 now. And you're like, what? The JSConf Asia that I just spoke in Singapore had a starting page that had a skip link. And I'm like, really? You know, Flash tunnels are dead for a long, long time. Now we do it in HTML5, but okay. But a lot of these standards are now usable, and there's great stuff in there. There's drag and drop uploading. There's things like image generation, and I did, for example, this thumbnail thing that I found really, really cool. Createthumbnails.com or something like that. Let's make thumbnails.com, which allows you to take some images of your hard drive, and now I gotta find some non-embarrassing ones that would probably be good. Image bucket cartoons, that can't be wrong. So you take those, and there's a GIF in there, and you drag them into the browser, and in the browser it then creates a zip file of thumbnails for you. So I resize them all on the fly. I create a zip file, and that's all client side. There's no server involved. There's nothing involved. And this stuff is on GitHub. You can try it out. You can also see the thumbnails that are generated. And you can also define the options of the thumbnail. So you can say, like, if you want to have another size, let's say like 100 and 200. You can have the quality different to like bad JPEG, good JPEG. You can crop it or not crop it. So in this case, I add it to the other one. You can set the background color. That's just an input type color. There's no jQuery involved in this one as well. And this is all possible in the browser nowadays. And people don't use that. Many upload forms are still like, please select 15 files and hate your life by the time you're actually getting to your expenses back. This stuff is in the browser and we should be using them. But it's not sexy, it's not cool, it's not like functional programming and reactive whatever. That's why people don't even look at these things. And I think it's very important that they're usable and across browsers. And there's this great website called caniuse.com that shows you all the different features in browsers that you can say, for example, drag and drop. And then it shows you which browser supports it and which one doesn't, and it has all the information about how it doesn't support it, and so on and so forth. So before you go to that jQuery plugin, before you go to that library or go to GitHub and look for drag and drop library, just take a look at what browsers are supporting it and say like, okay, if the browsers that don't support it make it an input type file, then people can pick it still. For the others, they can drag and drop it into it. And if you make the input type file display block and make it the whole screen, then everybody has drag and drop because that's how it works in browsers anyways. JavaScript, of course, turned to ES6, and that's amazing because now we have finally a standardized new version of JavaScript. It took us 15 years to get there because in between we had like all the stuff from Flash and all the things that then we had like CoffeeScript and all the other prefixes and kind of stuff. And ES6 is not for everybody. You shouldn't feel depressed if you look at like the tech press or tech meme or whatever, and you see every new day, oh, you don't use destructuring yet. You probably will be homeless next month because everybody needs to use that right now. There's lots of features in ES6 that are not for everybody, and some of them are for everybody. So take your pick as well. There's every part of ES6 is for different audiences. And it's encouraging though, like as I said before, there's Kangax, GitHub.io, I think he works for Facebook. Yeah. And he does this really cool compatibility table which shows you all the features of ES6 and which browser supports it to which level. And this one got more and more green over the last few years, and I'm very, very happy about this. Again, look at those things, see if they work out for you, and then start playing with them. But don't get discouraged when you think like, oh, I don't know about promises. Promises are very important, but you don't need to write your own. Transpilers for old environments, thanks very much. Babel.js.io, the guy who wrote it is now at Facebook as well. Australian guy, absolutely lovely. And yeah, we heard that before. This is when you really want to support every browser with it. Use Transpilers to convert ES6 code to ES5 code. It's a bit of a problem because you only create ES5 code for every browser then. So all the implementations of ES6 in the browsers never get used. So we cannot tweak the browser and make them faster and the implementation of ES6 faster because the code never gets executed in the browser itself. So you got to think about that a bit. This is basically what it looks like. Anyways, don't know why I have anything there. You can do things like TypeScript, which is if you really want to go full on, I want to have a type-safe language, because ES6 has classes, ES6 has constants, has let, which is a block-level statement, but it doesn't have any type safety yet, because JavaScript just doesn't have it. And even the classes in ES6 are just simulated syntactic sugar, because under the hood they're just factory methods. But in TypeScript you can have type safety, which means for you probably not much, but if you build something like Facebook, you build something for like Google Mail, then any variable that knows that it's an integer doesn't need the memory needed for a string or something that can get converted into a string. So for IoT devices, for low-end mobile devices, this is a very powerful thing to have. So a lot of people use TypeScript to build libraries with. The Dojo Foundation is using TypeScript. Angular 2 is written in TypeScript now because it's written in JavaScript that converts to JavaScript, which is pretty awesome. And under the hood, TypeScript understands what the environment understands in ES6 and uses it when it's possible, and only transpiles the things to ES5 that are not supported. In-browser developer tools are incredible. It's like you can build a whole website in the browser now without doing anything else. I mean, you can go into your developer tools, do an inspect here like in Firefox, and you can start writing your HTML. You have your stop points, you have style editors with color pickers and all kind of stuff in there. And this is just amazing. I mean, back when I started, I had alerts, and that was all I had. And nowadays, you can even find out when the browser was scrolling, how the performance was, where your memory went. You have detailed insights into what every browser does. So please use these developer tools and get used to them, because there's incredible stuff in there. One of my favorite things in Firefox that you probably don't know about, it has this console in there, but it also has a console for the browser itself. So if you do Shift F2, function F2, you get a control for the whole browser. And I know a few blind developers that use that to debug websites, for example. So one of my favorite things here is screenshot. If you type screenshot, then it creates a screenshot of the page. If you type screenshot -- clipboard, it puts the screenshot inside your clipboard. If you do screenshot clipboard -- full screen, it's a full page. It scrolls the whole page and takes a screenshot of it. That's how I make 90% of my slides nowadays, instead of installing some extra software that does that for me. So these are the kind of things that you have in browsers nowadays, instead of always complaining that the browser environment is not good enough for development. We've got kick-ass editors and debuggers. We saw a few of the tools earlier, like JSLint, ESLint, NPM, Node. All these environments are incredible. I got used to Visual Studio Code now because we just open sourced that. And I was a Sublime Text user before that. Atom is another one that people are using. What I really, really like about that one is the CSS stuff. So if you have a CSS embedded in the page, we're now trying to find one, demo styles, for example. So if you have a color in that one and you start typing it in, it gives you a drop down of all the colors with their names. And that's pretty awesome. Rather than having to do a color picker and those kind of things, you have that directly in the editor itself. And the editor is also tying in with GitHub. So if you now have GitHub, you can put the message in there and send it there without going to your command line and all of this thing. This thing is built in JavaScript. This is written in ES6 and is on GitHub available as open source. And this is just amazing that we can write our tools for writing our languages now in the languages that we're writing them in. Something like that. I think there was a sentence there somewhere. In any case, we have amazing debuggers and stuff. Remote debugging services and tools. You can connect the phone to your computer and debug the phone on your desktop. You click things on the phone and you see the results on your desktop. You can use Winery or like Volon.js and these kind of things to test devices that are on the other side of the planet with a VPN somewhere. It's incredible what we can do with that. And if you're not using that yet, please think about it, because installing everything on your machine means that your machine is the test platform and not the web. We've got open communication channels. Every browser has a GitHub repository. Every browser has a Twitter account. Some of them have Slack channels. And you can talk to browser makers the way you want to. In our case, uservoice.modern.ie is if you want to have something in Edge that's not there, please tell us there about it. Don't go to Twitter and complain that we don't do it, because that just wastes everybody's time. Go to where the developers of the browsers are and complain there, because then they can fix it rather than the PR department coming to them. Participation is very welcome. Play with that stuff, especially across-platform stuff is very, very important that more people do it. And assume that the future is bright. I think the biggest problem that we have with craft on the web that made us having to do the things that we had to do in the browser to make it compatible is because people assumed unknown is terrible. Assume that the unknown is good. Browsers are evergreen now. Every new operating system comes out would have a good browser in it. So if you cannot detect it, assume that it's a good one. And there's a great stuff coming out. Offline web solutions, Chrome Summit just had the whole talk about everything about Service Worker. It's basically an HTTP router in JavaScript. It's amazing what you could do with Service Worker, and there's good stuff coming. Device capability access. Accessing the camera is incredibly simple now. So uploading images, you can always have a little button in there saying people like, please upload an image. And I just wrote that for our team here when I had a simple cam shot thing. Oh, is my localhost still running? Yeah. So this is a JavaScript that you can say like, okay, start the camera, and then it says like share the selected device. And you can do a hello, and hopefully. And you click on it, you take a screenshot of it, and then you stop the camera again. And this is progressively enhanced. So if the browser has no camera access, this button doesn't appear. All you put is in the page is a div with a class on it, and you call an init function with that CSS selector. And if the browser doesn't support it, the end user never has to know. And this is what JavaScript is about. Not like tell the user that they're terrible and they should upgrade their browser and basically are not cool enough to use your website. That stuff is all available across browsers nowadays, and you can use it in a simple JavaScript here. Componentization, modularization. We've got web components for a long, long time thinking about it. Bit of a blowback on that one, but ES6 modules and Webpack modules and stuff like that. We can write massive JavaScripts in little unique packets rather than one big monolith. And simplification due to convenience method and more capable browsers. So take a look at caniuse.com before you use those 12 libraries again, just to make something simple work. And sometimes think about like, do people really need this? Do people really want to have a carousel again? No, they don't. Believe me, they don't. Any user testing shows you that. Stop thinking in browsers and start thinking in opportunities. IE6 is dead. It's a retired browser. It sits in the park and feeds the ducks. That's what it should be doing. Don't give it any animations. Don't give it any beautiful interfaces. IE6 users seeing something beautiful just get confused. They will not know what that is. Just give them something that works. And let's clean up this mess and make way to the future. I think the problem that the web is right now, that we're keeping craft and we're keeping problems all the time because we think old browsers are still around that are not around anymore, and instead we should write simple functionality and enhance it for the better browsers. That way we will always work for the next generation, not for the last generation. There's a great tool called Static Scan, which allows you to enter a website and it shows you what the problems in it is. So it shows you when you have like browser sniffing and these kind of things. Oh, that's going to be fun. And there you basically say like, okay, we got CSS prefix in use, for example, and these are the selectors that we found and where they are. So you can take a look at that. Are they still necessary, or are they actually just cruft from before? Like MS Transform is not supported anymore, so that can be deleted. Every code you can delete is probably a good thing for your end users out there. Cross-browser experience, is it responsive? Does it pre-render and pre-fetch? Are they missing alt attributes? Windows features, who cares? But I think it's very interesting to show this to clients and see how they can make their websites a bit faster. And that one is also on GitHub, so you can run that behind a firewall. You can even run it as part of your ongoing integration testing. That's all I had, so thanks very much.